Dr. Danieli, you will have to unmute yourself, I believe.
Unmute.
There you go. Yeah, wonderful.
There we go. Yes, now I go. Just a moment. Oh my God.
You got your papers back yet or not quite?
It's quite extraordinary how my opening just ran out, but it's back. So,
wonderful.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all on the third day of our summit. As I stated earlier, our program has contained people from over 50 countries, from all continents, all alarmed at the drastic rise of domestic family violence during the COVID-19 era, driven as it has been done by abuse of power and neglect of and against people of all vulnerable or differently abled groups of all ages and peoples. Until last night, the summit has 740 registrants and over 130 views on Facebook. I'm Dr. Danieli, convener and chair of the Working Group on Domestic Family Violence during the COVID-19 era of the United Nations Headquarters, New York, Alliance on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice. As I said in my opening remarks, everything about this summit has been a voluntary labor of love. You can familiarize yourself with the illustrious members of the working group, our amazing tech team, and superb interpretation at our website. I'm deeply grateful for each one for generously contributing the unique best to help make the summit a reality. We would not have translation had it not been for Nadine El-Khoury Unger, who humbled me with her generosity. My deepest gratitude is reserved for Karen Judd-Smith for lending her professionalism and organizational genius to fulfilling my vision for the summit. The summit is about people, us, women, older persons, persons discriminated against because of their sexual orientation and gender identity, persons with disability and or chronic illness, children and youth, refugees, migrants, and people living in poverty who can barely socially distance, all living together in our individual, family, institutional, and collective home, all under multiple existential threats, stumbling to escape and defend against a killer, invisible common enemy, and human frailty. As the incidence of COVID-19 has surged throughout the world, and as it is resurging now, almost all countries have imposed lockdown measures as the primary protection against the virus. Strict sheltering in place practices, however, also mean that the most vulnerable are the most defenseless and lonelier than the most vulnerable are more defenseless and lonelier than ever. Unable to flee or seek help, they are cut off from their usual sources of support. They cannot alert family members, friends, neighbors, schools, places of worship, or other community resources. Indeed, reports of a significant rise in the number of individuals exposed to domestic family violence during the COVID-19 era around the world have chillingly mushroomed. The situation of vulnerable groups is so grave that some have named the mental health consequences of the pandemic-related measures and domestic family violence the second and third pandemics. The summit provides a platform for victim survivors of domestic family violence to share their experiences and concerns. Many generously provided pre-recorded voices that you will hear some of today too, to begin and end the various panels of our program. Please listen to their courageous truth and heed their lessons. They are the master experts of their experiences, and we, the so-called experts, become that only because we listen to what they say. Experts will have joined us and today as well to present comparative worldwide findings. We have had program leaders and caregivers to share best practices in responding to, treating, and preventing domestic family violence. And of course, governments and policymakers to share effective policies and ways of implementation. A key goal of the summit is to re-energize the commitment of all stakeholders, including individuals, families, community institutions such as faith-based, educational, media, cultural and other organizations, and governments on local, national, regional, and international levels for a world free of domestic family violence and all other forms of violence. We will, at the end of today, adapt and be able to sign the declaration to that effect. We were blessed with the greetings and recognition given to the seriousness of the summit on our first day by His Holiness Pope Francis and by United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Yesterday, we were comforted by Rabbi Arthur Schneier. Today, we are privileged to welcome into our midst Conrad Tsui, Grand Chief of the Huron-Wendat Nation. Karen, do we have the Grand Chief's voice?
My name is Conrad Siwi. I just made the 12 years as Grand Chief of the Huron-Wendat Nations, and now I'm very proud to be participating to the high-level summit on domestic violence, and this is something that is very, very important to address, and I'm proud to be part of you. So among First Nations within Quebec and Canada, you know, it's been very tough to take because first of all, it's isolation, it's a confinement within our houses, within our own communities. Also, we don't have always the same capacities from a medical perspective to be able to go through all of the needs that are there, because we have to admit it, you know, there's a lot of mental illness and problems that might occur also. So, you know, racism exists also, and discrimination. And when you feel apart, when you feel that you know, you're not helped sufficiently, then you might, you know, you might not be able to go through these events and these situations. So what we do is we help all elderly people. You know, the elders are always, you know, the fundamental part of our nations, and and also our young people. We've opened our schools, and we've made sure that we were able to take care of the ones in need. We went to hunt also, and we got some moose meat for our families, for our people who are in need, and so on. So we try to work as a circle, as a community, where we are as strong as the weakest part of the chain, and we communicate by a circle. We make a circle and want to feed the fire within the circle, in the middle of the circle. And if we feed the circle with our good minds, our good thoughts, our good efforts also to help each other, then the fire is going to be strong, and no one is going to freeze. So this is how when we're going through the situation, and I encourage every one of you, disregarding where you live, the south or the north, to communicate. The answer is communication. We need to communicate a lot. We need to be together. We need to exchange and leave nobody else around or alone. Also, this is very important, because otherwise, when you start to see only the dark side of the moon, then it's getting dangerous. So we need to open up, make some light, help each other, and make sure that we are also a unity. We work in solidarity, and we have good allies also. I will finish by that. I want to thank all of our allies, people that might not be from First Nations, but do think from a circular perspective, where everybody is allowed to a rightful place. So I want to thank every one of you who participate to this very important gathering. And let me tell you that we salute what you do, and you always have a place right here. If you come to visit us in Wendake, in Quebec, we're welcoming you. And I want to thank the organizers also for what they do. This is of the utmost importance. Oh no, Chawonk.
So, we will now proceed to join in that circle, and to just the same examine some of the dark side of that moon. And to lead us is a close, wonderful friend. I formally opened the third day of the International Summit on Domestic Family Violence during the COVID-19 era by introducing the moderator of our distinguished roundtable, panel 7, together from awareness to accountability, Mr. Edward Mortimer, Distinguished Fellow at All Souls College, Oxford, and former Director of Communications for the United Nations Secretary General. May his soul rest in peace, Kofi Annan. Edward, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, it's a great honor and privilege for me to be moderating this incredibly distinguished roundtable, which includes several old friends of mine and also some very distinguished people who I'm delighted to meet for the first time. I think I dare to put in the former category Professor Jeffrey Sachs of Columbia University, who has made enormous contributions over the decades to the work of the United Nations. Particularly, I remember him organizing the Millennium Project in the early years of this millennium, which collected data from all around the world and really showed that the Millennium Development Goals were not just an idea, but provided concrete ways in which people in member states all over the world could work towards the achievement of those goals. So Jeff is, I believe, the first voice we're going to hear as part of this roundtable. And Jeff, I hope you're hearing me and that you are ready to take the floor.
Thank you, Ed. I'm always hearing you because your voice is global and always compelling. Ed really was the voice of the UN, and for me continues to be the voice of the UN for global decency and for all that we're hoping to accomplish together. So what a joy to see you, Ed, and thank you for letting me be part of today's discussion. And Yael, thank you for organizing this. We're most grateful. I want to be helpful. This is not an area where I have special expertise, but it is an area that I am hearing about every day from all over the world, and want to offer my services as best as I can to this cause. I am chairing two processes that I think can be relevant for action. One is I am chair of what's called the Lancet COVID-19 Commission, which is a global commission that has been initiated by the Lancet journal, the leading global health and medicine journal of the UK. And because of the esteem in which the Lancet is held, this Lancet COVID-19 Commission has become I think, a global powerhouse of expertise with the commissioners in leadership roles across the world in public health, politics, business, civil society, to promote solutions to the multiple challenges posed by this unprecedented upheaval and disruption. And one of those challenges is exactly the plight of the most vulnerable people on the planet, women facing domestic violence, children facing deprivation, First Nations, as we just heard, other minority groups that are always marginalized and now are especially vulnerable by reasons of poverty or being in the front lines most vulnerable to infection. This is an epidemic of ferocious inequality that has widened social and economic inequalities dramatically during this year. The rich have gotten so much richer in a short period of time, and the poor have suffered so much more than we could even have imagined possible in such a short period of time. As chair of the Lancet Commission, I've been hearing from all over the world about the rise of domestic violence. And this is not located in any single community. It's not about poor countries versus rich countries. I just heard a long, painful, vivid, and dramatic, moving presentation about this in Melbourne, Australia, which is a very sophisticated, well-run, well-governed country where the epidemic itself is relatively under control, but the rise of mental distress, depression, violence in households is on the rise as well. I've heard about this issue in the Middle East. I've had calls from ministers to help on how to set up hotlines or emergency response actions and best practices on this in Latin America, in the Middle East, in Asia, in the United States. So this is one area where I would like to be an amplifier of solutions. I need your advice. This is really, we are there to, we will be making a statement at the end of this year that will be widely read statement of the Lancet Commission, as was the one that we made on the occasion of the opening of the General Assembly. We will have reach into the Biden administration, certainly, and into many governments. So what I would ask for you is help on how to be effective support. We have a task force on vulnerable populations and the epidemic. And so, Yael, if I could ask you to come back and give me guidance on that, to join the deliberations, help to inform this group, this would be absolutely fantastic. In addition, I am one of the leads of a process on well-being measurement and metrics more generally. I co-edit the World Happiness Report each year. I chair something called the Global Happiness and Well-being Council, which was established by the United Arab Emirates. And I work closely with the OECD on this. And the idea of all of those interjoined efforts is to mobilize better data and better metrics on how people's lives are going, how happy or unhappy people are, according to mobilizing new important information, and then using that information to advise governments on how they can target well-being directly through public policies. We've been asked specifically by one of the ministers of the United Arab Emirates to come up with recommendations on exactly the issue of how COVID-19 can be better addressed by governments to help the most vulnerable populations. The Emirates established telephone hotlines and emergency response operations, and they want to know more about what better to do and how the coalition of governments around the world that they have organized can help on that. So that's another process along the same lines. I have a group of colleagues, again, as an economist, I don't know anything particular about anything, but maybe a little bit about money here and there, but my colleagues are the experts, whether in public health or in psychology, and we're collecting a lot of data on the psychological effects of this pandemic. It's dramatic. The rise of depression, of anxiety, of other mental illnesses and disorders or unhappiness in general. So we're trying to use this corollary process to get better data as well. And this is another area where I would like your advice on how we can mobilize data. I should mention, incidentally, that as a member of the United Nations Broadband Commission, I'm also working with the online tech leaders, the big tech companies and the telecommunications industry. And they could be perhaps part of the solution here as well, how to use big data more effectively, or simply the data lines to prevent abusive social media. That's one area. Protect children from harm, which is a major focus of the Broadband Commission, but also to address this challenge of domestic violence. So let me leave it at there with those opening remarks to say that I'm available as any kind of help that I can be. Thank you very much.
Well, that's wonderful, Jeff. Thank you very much for that. I think we have, because you've been very disciplined about your time, we have a few minutes in hand. So if anybody else in the round table would like to respond to Jeff's remarks or ask him a question, I think there would be time for that.
May I just welcome Jeff's, it's Yael. May I just welcome Jeff's invitation? You have our commitment, no question about it. And also we will have a report of the meeting. You know, we've been meeting, as I said, now it's the third day. And we will have a report of the meeting that should prove very useful for all the initiatives you mentioned. So we will be in touch, and
Wonderful.
And we will put you in touch. Also, WHO just. Claudia, do you want to? I don't know if you can.
I can see that Claudia has asked.
Hi.
Go ahead, Claudia. You're not in the round table.
Yourself then, Claudia.
Thank you. Good morning, afternoon, evening. I'm Claudia Garcia-Morena, and I head the unit on addressing the needs of vulnerable populations in one of WHO's departments. And I just wanted to welcome Jeffrey's invitation.
Wonderful.
And, you know, to say that, you know, I was just asking if you could share your email so that we can provide you with some information in response to your invitation for input.
I'll do that, and it's easy email. It's sachs@columbia.edu. So
Okay.
It's very simple. No numbers, no underscoring, no periods. I bargained hard for that email, and we're also working with Madam Yamamoto very closely on health as well-being. So you know, I'm deeply committed to WHO. So Claudia, thank you very much, and I'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll be in touch.
We all hope to see the United States playing a full part in WHO.
Won't that be nice?
We would welcome that for sure.
All right. Well, thank you very, very much, Jeff. As usual, I think you've inspired and encouraged everybody, and we will certainly look forward another great Sachs report to look forward to at the end of the year, and remembering the weight and importance of some previous Sachs reports. I know what that means.
Thank you so much, Ed, and thanks to everybody. I'll leave now, this being the age of Zoom. I'm supposed to be on a Zoom in a moment. So best wishes to everybody. Thank you very much, and we will follow up.
Well, I'm sure if anyone can be on 5 or 6 Zooms at the same time, it's probably Jeff. But thank you very much indeed. So I think our next voice is going to be that of Superintendent Corey Zaharuk from the Investigative Services Division of the Regina Police Service, which is in Saskatchewan, Canada. And I know he's been very active and successful in dealing with gangs in that part of Canada. But I think he has something in particular to say, which might follow on from Chief Conrad's remarks about. But I mean, is that right, Corey, that you were going to say something about them working together with the different peoples of Canada that to deal with this problem? But if I've got that wrong, correct me, please. Is he there?
Yes, he's here virtually. Hold on one second. He should be coming up.
Right.
Oh dear. We're having some interesting technical difficulties. Hold on one moment, please. We're getting a failed sign. Let's again, one more time. We had been successful until today.
Always like that.
Yes.
Should we go first to the next voice, which is going to be Nilfur from Tajikistan?
Hold on one second. Again, this is I think we are ready.
No, that looks like Corey's.
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk about the work the Regina Police Service does to respond to domestic conflict. Regina is a Canadian prairie city with a population of about 240,000 people. 9% of our citizens identify as Indigenous. We work hard every day to keep our city safe and do so by constantly focusing on building and maintaining strong relationships while delivering respectful professional service. Our officers respond to a very high number of domestic conflict incidents every day. We use the term domestic conflict to recognize that interpersonal violence, intimate partner violence, and other forms of conflict not only occurs between current and former partners, but can also occur between family members and others. Our responses and investigative efforts to reduce harm and prevent victimization are comprehensive and include collaboration with other stakeholders. Throughout Canada, including Regina, Indigenous people are overrepresented in the criminal justice system, both as victims and accused persons. In spite of this, the Regina Police Service and our city's Indigenous leaders and residents have built many strong relationships based on mutual respect, trust, and a shared desire for community safety and well-being. I encourage you to visit our website, reginapolice.ca, to learn more about this relationship-building endeavor. On our site, under Resources, you'll find a link to Our Journey, a document that describes our many efforts to build relationships with, include, and recruit Indigenous people, as well as our efforts to learn more about Indigenous culture, ceremony, and values. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, Regina Police Service officers were responding to about 17 incidents of domestic conflict a day. Now, in the midst of the pandemic, we respond to about 20 such incidents a day. Although police responses are critical, this is not the sole solution. There is always more work to do, including building upon and improving collaborative response models and providing education and supports to families. What's vitally important to the Regina Police Service is to ensure our responses to domestic conflict are swift, consistent, and thorough. To achieve this, we have strong oversight systems in place. We provide ongoing training to our officers and call takers. And most importantly, we have structured, close working relationships with support service agencies who offer valuable follow-up services to victims, offenders, and survivors. Of significant importance, especially during this pandemic, is the comprehensive, easily accessible link on our website to help stop domestic violence. By visiting our website, reginapolice.ca, you'll find a valuable resource link with comprehensive information on domestic conflict, how to report, where supports exist, and other important information. We've designed the site so you can quickly exit and clear your browser history if needed. Domestic conflict remains a serious issue in our communities. We need to continue to learn and adapt as necessary in order to be effective. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Superintendent. I think we need to press on. Am I right, Yael, that we should now have Nilfur from Tajikistan?
We will be showing Nilfur.
من شهروند جمهوری تاجیکستان 51 ساله صاحب 4 فرزند عین حال مجرد در همین دوام 23 سال زندگی کردگیمون ما خوشبختانه نقد زندگی میکردیم وقتی که مردکم به روسیه رفت روسیه اومد تماما مردکم دیگه خیلی شد شوهرم خیلی حقارت‌های بی‌معنی میداد گپای وقتی که ما را همین مردک زد هم خیلی تو کوب کرد حتی نمیمون که ما آوازم برویا انت گل قرطاق ما بینی ما ده همه بعد ده مرا یادم کنم همون فرزندی مایده که ما گرفته خونه دروارد همین حالت ما از جایم خسته دروازه را پول کردم در جایش همسایه‌ها مرا پیش دروازم گرفته با بیرون برآوردن. حتی مردکم دویده اومده شوهرم که ما ایرا میکشم گفته با زنهای همسایه همه خیلی شپ و شپ شید. مرا زنهای همسایه مرا گرفته به خونهشون بردن. در اونجا مرا چی کردن آرام کردن و مرا با ملیس خونه. در اونجا وجه‌آوری کشیده میشه و گفته یا 2 سال ای آزادی محروم میشوی یا که 40,000 سومان دولت پول میسپری. لیکن اون کس در پیش ملیس ما دیگه نمیکنم. ما توبه کردم. خیلی گفت ما عریضه ما گرفتم که همین مردک پولی کلون خونه در همین دولت نسپره که ترمش نکنن. این بعدی با همین 1-2 روز نقض بود کمتر. لیکن با بعدی 1-2 روز یک سحر تمامی ویران توی خونه ما همه را زده شکست که تو با خوبی ببرو که مطرح با تور میکشم و همین پول خونه را کنده تر تای پول دا گور میکنم. دستگیری از طرف مثال حکومت حسابی در اونجا نگاه میکردن. هشت ماه اخیر میشود که در تمام دنیا از تمام خلق نرخ نوا قیمت شد، داروها قیمت شدن، حتی آدما یا که میروند زنکای جبر دیده هست که میخوان که به همین یگون کارخانه مراجعت کنن رفتن.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm not sure whether Nilfur can hear us, but I'm sure we all would want to thank her for that and to send our sympathy and encouragement. It is really tragic just how one sees and hears similar stories repeated from all around the world, even in countries which you might not immediately connect with such problems. So now I think we start on the round table proper, which I hope will be as interactive as possible. And so I've asked each of the participants to make fairly short opening remarks to introduce themselves and perhaps the main point that they think we should hear from them. And then I hope that they will discuss, comment on each other's ideas, ask questions, and we will allow other participants to do the same. So first on the list is my very distinguished friend, who I think of as the diplomat and activist formerly known as Prince Zeid Al Hussein. Probably doesn't need any introduction, worked as a peacekeeper in Bosnia-Herzegovina, was a stellar ambassador of his country, Jordan, both in Washington and at the United Nations in New York, chaired the Assembly of States Parties of the International Criminal Court for a number of years, and most recently had a very distinguished but incredibly challenging and difficult period as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And now he tells me he's still in New York teaching law, which he is extraordinarily well qualified to do, and I'm sure he's contributing in many other ways as well. So Zeid, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Edward, for this very warm welcome. I'm deeply grateful to you, and it's wonderful to be sharing this space with Yael, and thank you, Karen, for chairing the proceedings over the last few days. I have to say I wasn't able to attend all of the summit, but did attend parts of it and was deeply impressed by many of the interventions, and humbled too, because like Jeffrey, I have no direct experience in this unsavory, particularly unsavory quarter of human experience. No expertise in the pathologies of violence, either at a neurological level by those who practice it, or understand the dynamics at the family or society level beyond the anecdotal. And all of this is better understood by so many others. And I think it was a privilege to hear and grasp what it is that they were saying over the last 2 days. It seems to me to be a particularly cruel phenomenon when circumstances, adverse circumstances brought on by the coronavirus, forces on society protections like lockdowns that for many mean anything but, because of the underlying factors, creating deeper stress, if not pain, for those experiencing violence or the threat thereof. I was recently reading some poetry by Hafiz, a wonderful sort of collection of short and sweet poems. He, in one of them, he entitled The Small Table of Time and Space. There's an image that sort of connects directly to this topic, because the small table is a lovely representation of proximity, around and across which love, untrapped by hate, ought to be flowing, or would normally flow freely around it. And where it is interrupted indeed by, or even destroyed by violence or the threat thereof, well, the terror and the sadness of it all is well appreciated. So the 3 points from me, and so rather than 1 point, but very quick, I believe that there needs to be, as many have said, community-based sensitivity. Neighbors, friends need to band together, watch out for children, women, persons with disabilities, the elderly, using critical code words for those, from sort of critical code words to communicate with those who are exposed to potential violence or are being violated. There must be, secondly, mobilization of civil society where the state is unresponsive because it is uncaring, incompetent, or both. And unfortunately, there are many of those. Domestically, of course, this organization must be grounded in sort of domestic forces, but it needs support from the outside. And that's the third point, that there has to be pressure from without. International bodies must understand the power of words and the leverage that they can have. And we've heard from the relevant independent experts over the course of the last 2 days. But I do believe the UN needs to pick on a particularly egregious situation and eschew general formulations of language that I believe they're utterly useless. They need to work together with local civil society and speak publicly and pointedly to the government in question. Not shy away from it. This is an area of my own work and experience that I believe does produce a result. And unfortunately, and perhaps we can discuss this, I think the UN generally is weak at the moment, and it could be stronger. Thank you.
Indeed, thank you very, very much, Zeid. We'll come back to those points, I'm sure. But let me now call on Nafissatou Diop, who comes from a country that is particularly dear to me because I had the great good fortune to live and work there when I was very young, and she was probably not yet born in 1962. And so I allow myself to say, Nanga Defwe. And she is, of course, a very important and distinguished official of the UNFPA with an enormous experience. And before that, she worked for the Population Council. And she's dealt with all kinds of things to do with reproductive health, family planning, youth, post-abortion care, female genital mutilation, and HIV/AIDS services in West Africa. So, Madame, je vous donne la parole.
Bonjour et merci beaucoup de m'inviter. And I'm going to respond in Wolof, my local language. Jërëjëf, ñu ngi sant Yàlla. Thank you so much. So it's a pleasure to be here today and representing UNFPA, who is the United Nations Population Fund. I'm Nafissatou Diop. I'm the chief of the Gender and Human Rights branch. And actually, I'm from Senegal, but I'm based in New York. So my duty station is New York, actually. I would like just to put a little bit of another perspective, because I think that a lot of the previous speakers have quite, elaborated on several topics. But there is one that is quite important to for me and what we are doing currently as UNFPA, which is, really looking at gender norms and look at how, gender norms can also be harmful for men and boys. I think that we have now a lot of evidence that boys often grow up believing they should be self-reliant, not show emotions, not be concerned with their health. This is in stark contrast with what most people actually want. Men and boys who are respectful, loving, and healthy. So supporting men and boys' participation is a win-win situation. And I would like to really just, for my few remarks, because we cannot talk about everything, and over the past 2-3 days, a lot have been said. I would just want to talk about that particular element, that most men want to be part of the solution. And this is true that they are the problems in most of the case, but they also want to be part of the solution. So we must strengthen the focus on structural issues informed by, of course, feminist approaches. This includes changing social norms embedded in our cultures, societies, and relations. And when I'm talking about that, I'm not only looking at the global south or a country like Senegal, where I'm coming from, but I'm looking at countries around the world. We have a serious issue that is really seen in all the societies in the global north or the global south. And there is there is a need really to look at that particular aspect of why this violence and where it is coming from. And sometimes, as research shows us, it is coming from that young boy who is living in a family and in a neighborhood where he's confronted to violence every day. And he's growing up with that violence. He's growing up with some toxic masculinity norms. And those norms, we need to address them. Sometimes, as firefighters for the current situation, but most of the time we need to go back to where the problem is starting, which is during our childhood, during adolescence, and address those issues. So I just want to say that really promoting gender equality and that empowerment of women and girls is at the heart of what UNFPA is doing. And it's we have a long and strong tradition of working with men and boys and involve them as partners, recipient of services, but also agent for social change and for women's and girls' agency. We do think that it is important that we shape what it means to be a man. It really starts, as I said earlier. This is why, for example, comprehensive sexuality education is a key pathway for reaching boys at early age with messages of respect, fairness, and consent. we really appreciate the, hundreds of partners and stakeholders who are really looking at that particular aspect of working with men and boys, engaging them, addressing harmful and toxic masculinity, and ensuring that we are going to build a stronger, coherent community and societies. I can give some example. Husband schools in Niger is really to educate men on reproductive health and foster behavior change. And they are educated to support their wife, to support the women, to support the girls, to have access to sexual and reproductive health and rights. It has been evaluated, and it has shown tremendous change in the status and the agency for women, and the capacity and the decision to request services. We know that in other places, there is some programs that are looking at men and fatherhood to address, and look at men, in care work. So those are some of the small examples that are possible. And we do think that it's important to bring it in this conversation of this forum, to look at more carefully at this issue and look at the root of this toxic masculinity. This is leading to domestic violence and family violence. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm very glad that you spoke about men and boys. And because actually I was saying to Yael beforehand that we tend, of course, to focus on the terrible experiences of the victims, but we will only change things if we can change the mentality and the attitudes of the people who are perpetrating these horrible acts of violence. I'm really fascinated by the husband school that you described, but I sort of wonder whether if you're in that kind of culture of masculinity, even the idea of going to a husband school you might not feel would stigmatize you in some way. And I mean, I wonder, is it actually easy to get men and boys to attend schools like that?
Yes, thank you. And I think that this is where we are talking about social norms. What we understood is that, if you take 2, 3, 4 people, and then you think that you want to make the change there, of course they are going to be stigmatized. But if this is a collective change, led by influential people, because I think that we have seen, even recently, with so many, examples in the US, if I can talk about that, the Black Lives Matters and all the other movements that we have seen recently, the power of a collective action, the power of an influential person who positively or negatively can influence a whole nation or a whole and huge group of people. So what we learn is that, it has to be, programmed, adequately to really reach out to a critical mass of people. So if the leader is showing a good example, there will be a tendency to follow. And if there is, you are not 2 or 3, but what we call, ignorance, some kind of ignorance from people, that actually your neighbor also is respectful and would like to see his wife, giving birth in the best condition, using contraception, spacing birth, etc. So pluralistic ignorance is a problem that needs to be broken. And so everybody somewhere, need to know that all the people are caring and would like really to have a more, positive approach to women, see really all together how, this change can make, and see the benefits of it for their community, for themselves as men, for themselves as husbands. So I think that I will just like to put there the issue of the collectivity, which, as you know, having lived in Africa, Professor, you know how it is, and that we need to have, that group vision and not an individual behavior change approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, that's
Edward, could I jump in just very quickly on this?
Yes, please, Zaid. Yes, sorry.
I think what Nafissa is saying was hugely important, the hyper masculinity and the way it affects intimate partner violence. But I think we have to be careful as well, because in the adjacent field of the violence perpetrated on domestic workers, for instance, and it's very close there, the violence comes both from women and men. So I think we have to be careful when we discriminate between these conditions. It all goes back to Yael's initial point. It's all the power differential. I mean, the power differential is what is ultimately at the source of this problem. And I think if you look at the violence visited on domestic workers, you'll notice that it's from both genders and
yes,
all across.
Yes, absolutely. I think there is no monopoly either of perpetration or indeed of victimhood, even if the balance tends, unfortunately, because of the power imbalance so often between men and women, violence of men against women is probably the most frequent. Now, please let me call on Ambassador Miwa Kato, who is the director of the Division of Operations of the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. She's from Japan, but of course is based in Vienna because that's where UNODC is. And again, she has a lot of experience in dealing with, as you would expect, law, criminality, and justice in various contexts. But previously, she was regional director for Asia Pacific of UN Women. So I think she knows a lot about the particular issues that concern us today. And Miwa, please let us hear from you now. Thank you.
Thank you very much for letting me join this very distinguished panel. And I was carefully listening to the discussions preceding me, and I kind of dropped the speech that's been prepared for this, because I think what we need to do in this current context as we try to deal with this issue of domestic violence, violence against women, children, others who are under increased vulnerability under this current specific circumstance of lockdown and other measures related to COVID, we really need to think beyond what we're used to doing. I mean, already before the pandemic hit, there has been major issues around violence against women and domestic violence, where we've been seeing at least 1 in 5 women experiencing intimate partner violence at one point in life. Depending on the region and country context that you look at, the percentage is much higher, of course. And also, there's been issues around the challenges of looking at this particular type of crime as opposed to many other forms of crime that are in more open space. There's already been a lot of issues before the pandemic. But now, since this COVID situation hit, we've been trying to do rapid assessment of the impact of this on domestic violence, violence against women at home by intimate partners. And from the recent study that we've conducted, based on working with reports from 30 countries across different parts of the world on gender-related killing and sexual violence, it indicates a very large increase in the access to hotlines, helplines related to domestic violence. And yet, for formal reporting on similar domestic violence or homicide cases, the reporting is significantly decreased, meaning that the official channels of seeking support or justice is not functioning at the same level that it usually did, which was already lower than we would like it to be. So given these circumstances, of course, we need to keep on doing what we do, but I think we need to do so much more. And in the conversation today, I'm hearing a lot of things and hope to hear more through reading the collective report of this very useful summit, to put our minds together what we can do more. Obviously from UNODC's perspective, but I think as the colleague before me has also mentioned, from across the UN, there is a strong awareness about us needing to do much more comprehensive action, not just looking at the issue of domestic violence or violence against women or at homes in its isolation. From our point of view, obviously, the big part that we need to engage is really the communities. And I don't mean it just in the sense of traditional civil society organizations, people who are committed to mobilizing around this issue. Of course, they're important, but I think in trying to find solutions in reducing and eliminating this problem, the big hope that I see refers to the fact that my previous speaker from UNFPA has also mentioned. It's an issue that's very close to home. It's close to people's experiences as an individual. So if we can have more dramatic mobilization to tap into the consciousness and wish for people to make a change, from where they relate as neighbors, as family members, as community members, to address this issue. And if we can do much more to support in this area, that will definitely be very effective. Of course, the other side of the coin is that the public institutions, and in particular the whole chain of criminal justice machinery, need to be able to deal with this much more effectively. And this is the part, of course, my current office that I work for, UNODC, focuses very much on, together with other partners. But this is unfortunately an area, whether we talk about criminal justice sector as a whole in terms of law enforcement, a lot of attention's been diverted to implementing lockdowns and looking at the circumstances of crisis rather than looking at these kind of issues. If we look into prison settings, which is another place where a lot of abuse occurs and victims of domestic violence end up in as well, we see alarming rate of dwindling and decreasing resources being devoted by governments in this time of crisis. So how can we counter that? I hope to learn much more through this discussion, but our position is that we need to break down the different silos of efforts that we make to address these issues into looking into the individuals who experience these violence, and to somehow look for an approach that is not segmented by different types of interventions, but that we take the whole community lens and criminality and violence reduction being one part of a socioeconomic, I guess, more than anything else, response that we hope to bring around the table. Let me stop there because I'm sure my time is up. But only to say that it's a very important issue that this summit is bringing to highlight. And I very much look forward to learning further and reflecting this in the work that we do as UNODC. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much. Very, very important intervention. And I was particularly interested by your reference to prisons. I think in my country, there's a lot of evidence that most criminals' behavior is not improved by being in prison. On the contrary, it's an environment in which they very often learn to be more violent, and they come out with very few choices other than to commit more crimes. So I think perhaps we should have a reflection on whether prison in most cases is the appropriate way to deal with people who are perpetrators of domestic violence. But let me now call on Victor Ochen, who represents the African Youth Initiative in Network in Uganda. And indeed, I think it's high time, Victor, that we heard from somebody of your generation. So please fire away.
Yeah, thank you so much, Edward and Yael and every other participants, and a great tribute to colleagues who have spoken before. And I send you warmest greetings from Uganda. You might have been following from the media. Yeah, we are navigating between politics and COVID. So it's a moment of politics of COVID and COVID of politics. So it's now a double effort that we have to struggle with. Coming back to today's dialogue on the domestic violence in regards to COVID, I will come in not as an expert, but I'll come in from the position of the voices from the community, the people who are going day-to-day experience, but also attributing it a little bit to my personal experience, having been in this kind of situations personally. I've experienced it myself. And why it is important is, in as bad as COVID has been, and it is still, it is actually not something very new to most of us from this part of the world. It might have not been COVID, but we've been through experiences of this nature. We have survived many endemics and pandemics of this nature before, in terms of our challenge and our lessons learned. I would think that, yes, this is one of those that has come, and we hope, like previous one, COVID too will come to an end at some point. But most importantly, when it comes to the plight of the vulnerable members of the society, in this case, the women and the children, this is where it affects in a more severe, and it becomes a more acute in a way that we have seen when lockdown conditionalities were to be implemented from Uganda and many other parts of the continent, many other parts of Africa. Majority of the population were too poor to lock down. And the economic hardship, the inability to provide for day-to-day feedings had to force so many mothers to violate the lockdown conditions, and to the point that they were breaking the law, of which so many women were imprisoned, were arrested, were imprisoned by the law enforcement authorities. And in a way, it could take some of the commitment of the local actors, the grassroots actors, who work day to day to see the plight of women and children. And if a woman is imprisoned, that means the entire family is imprisoned. My organizations, we have been for years working to support the victims of human rights violation, in this case, the victims of war. So immediately our service became an essential service. So we had to work working with the district task force, COVID task force at regional level, but also we had to make available the emergency trauma response team, amid is working with the Ministry of Health to support the communities. So in a way, underpinning all our struggle and all the plights of the people in the community, the poor and the women especially, it comes down to the discipline of policies in place. It comes down to the ability of the authorities to understand and identify with people's pain, to identify with people's plights, because we have also seen that on many occasions, there are many mistakes made by the government that from now onwards, we have to say nobody walks out of their home because you can now make an order online, a condition that less than 2% of the citizens can make an order online in Uganda. So in a way, due to lack of political preparations, it makes it quite difficult for people whose plights are alarming to withstand or to survive a situation like this. But at the end of the day, women and children became the biggest, most affected. And of course, we do know that in situations of emergency like COVID or like war, the most affected institutions are always not United Nations. They are not the government, they are not the international organization, but the most affected institution is the family. Families get torn apart, children suffer, women are subjected to all sorts of suffering and risk-taking, daring, and all that. So it will take a lot of time for people to come back, for society to rebuild, if families or communities fail to address the plight, the individual plights of the families. So coming from the ground, to date, we continue to do what we're doing, but at the most important thing is right now, majority of what we have seen, the biggest challenge has been the economic hardship, the economic incapacity of the communities has been so affected that there's been reported thousands of teenage pregnancies. And in most cases, the pregnancy came as a result of, most of the girls were impregnated by their family members. And then you find that with all these thousands of teenage pregnancies, that means they cannot go back to school. If they were to go back to school, maybe our families will have to prioritize. Even if they have to go back to school, they will say, who among, should we send a boy or a girl back to school? And of course, already there's a bigger effect on family disunity, making it quite a problem. And worst, being a situation of teenage pregnancy, a lot of medical attention or medical support requires blood transfusion, which is not happening right now because there's lack of blood donation due to COVID. And all this is impacting so much on women. I want to say thank you so very much for the opportunity to share this. As somebody from the community, I think we need to wear the lens of a family, of the home, and be in the shoes of those women, especially the girl child, who are really struggling, and communities that remain so entangled into poverty. So thank you very much. Welcome. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Victor, very much indeed. You see, you've introduced yet more dimensions into this terrifyingly multidimensional problem. And it's sort of hard to imagine a way in which COVID has not made it more difficult for families and for members of families, and it's almost as though it had been designed to turn families against each other and make them more dysfunctional. So I think you've given us a lot to think about. Now let me see that, well, yes, at this point, I think we were going to have had Judith Herman, who unfortunately wasn't able to stay with us for the whole roundtable. So Yael herself has very kindly agreed to become a panelist. She's been, of course, an absolutely driving presence. This whole event was her idea, and she's done incredible work to bring it about. And I think most of you know her or know about her by now. She founded the International Center for the Study, Prevention and Treatment of MultiGenerational Legacies of Trauma. She directs the group project for Holocaust survivors and their children. She's the past president of the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies. She's a trained psychiatrist. She's been working with victims of atrocities for many, many years. She told me that she's actually now the only surviving person who was involved in getting the United Nations to include victims in its work on these issues, going right back to 1985. I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to say that she has just turned 80, which nobody who knows her would easily believe. And she puts to shame those of us still struggling through our 70s by her amazing resources of energy and drive. But I think it's very good that there should be a point in the summit where she speaks, so to speak, in her own name and with her own ideas, rather than just making sure that everybody else is in the right space at the right time. So Yael, let me give you the floor.
Thank you, Edward. Judy Herman is an institution for all those who know the field of trauma. And I'll try to live up to replacing her spot here. But I'm deeply touched by everything said on this roundtable. And it is wonderful that I, at 80, follow Victor the young one on this panel, with total admiration for what the youth can do and does every day around the world. And he is indeed part of the advisory board of the International Center for Multi-Generational Legacies of Trauma, which are founded as my legacy, recognizing the multi-generational legacies, both psychologically, genetically, culturally, etc., and of course, recognizing the unique focus on family. So, but let me just speak a little bit about why you understand exactly why we have every single day invited the patriarchs of the world to begin our deliberations. They hold the power. For me, having been around international activities on victims for years, since the 1980s, I've become convinced that it's not just lack of political will, it's really far more, as others said, lack of cultural will. That's why we had the patriarchs here every day. To me, on a daily basis, in people's homes all around the world, it is indeed a cultural issue that the world is allowing abuse of power on all levels. From my point of view, having built the first program to help Holocaust survivors and their children in the 60s, I am terrified of the return to atrocious thinking among leaders. So we are talking about abuse of power, we are talking about patriarchy, we are talking about neglect, we are talking about how perhaps with our best of dreams, the old wisdom of solidarity, love thy neighbor as thyself, collectivity is based on that. Empathy. I have no argument with anything that was said today. I'm just humbled by the progressive thinking of this high-level roundtable. But we must take action now. There's just no way around it. Now, and we have had voices of men and boys in the last 3 days. The summit is being recorded. This will be available. You'll hear the voices. And our final panel will be led indeed by Fred, who is from Man Up campaign, together with a woman. You'll see. I don't want to give it, but I wanted to reflect a little bit, just a little bit, on the development of victims' rights. You know, it took the United Nations until 1985 to acknowledge victims' rights. I'm one of the happiest persons on earth with the privilege of participating in helping create that. And I would like to read just to you part of by the way, this is the Victims' Declaration, the Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power. I can spend a month telling you stories about it, how it came about, but I want to read to you just the definition and think about this. It's been around since 1985 now. A person may be considered a victim under the declaration, regardless of whether the perpetrator is identified, apprehended, prosecuted, or convicted, and regardless of the familial relationship between the perpetrator and the victim. The term victim also includes, where appropriate, I hate that phrase, but the immediate family or dependents of the direct victim, and persons who have suffered harm in intervening to assist victims in distress or to prevent victimization. Now, this little document is full of this kind of wisdom. As I said, it was created in 1985. Since then, we also created the remedy resolution that is the victim's rights to reparations on all levels, rehabilitation, participation, etc., and the international and the provisions, most progressive provisions on behalf of victims in the International Criminal Court that include participation on victims' participation, protection, rehabilitation, and reparations and rehabilitation. Now, why am I telling you this? We have policies. We have lots of wonderful words on paper. I know. One of the books I worked on was the 50th anniversary of the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. And in that book too, we asked, have the rights reached the victims? Are the rights lived by victims? Do they know they have rights? That's been my hugest pet peeve. I don't want to leave this world without victims knowing that they have rights, not just human rights, but if you suffered, if for any reason, any aspect of your life has been violated by abuse of power or by neglect, you do have rights. And it is stated in many documents, but I think not only should we call for collective action, for revisiting our cultural assumptions and cultural distorting human relationships by abuse of power and neglect of women, of men, of the elderly, of the disabled, of LGBTQ folks, of refugees, of migrants, of poor people. And we can go on and on and on. And of course, I want to also, pulling them together, our way of organizing our thinking has been siloed for the most part. Women have rights, children have rights, older persons, LGBTQ, but COVID made it very clear. We're all in the same home. And we cannot just keep siloing rights and siloing what we offer, or we're supposed to offer victims as ameliorating tools. So I totally agree about collectivity, about solidarity, totally important. And part of it is solidarity between men and women, of course. And really examining, really and honestly examining, how come we created the world where the solidarity is not taken for granted? Love thy neighbor in all religions. So let me stop here. You can see that I can continue on and on. It's, yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. You're an inspiration as always. But let me move on now, because waiting very patiently and listening all this time has been my very dear friend, Patricia Scotland, who I've certainly known for longer than any of you. Must be nearly 40 years, I think now, Patricia, that we've known each other. She shouldn't need much introduction. She comes from Dominica in the Caribbean. She came to Britain as a child. And she's, I think you are either the eldest or the second of a family of 12. Grew up in London in some quite challenging circumstances. Was told, I think, at the age of about 16 or 17 that her best hope of a career was to get a job in the local supermarket, but has crashed through one glass ceiling after another to be the first Black woman QC, and that's the best kind of barrister you can be in the British system, and then moved into politics, had a series of jobs in the Home Office and the Foreign Office, and rose eventually to be Attorney General of England and Wales. And then when that government left office in 2010, she devoted her attention precisely to this problem of domestic violence. And so I can't think of anybody, who was more suitable to become Secretary General of the Commonwealth, which she now is, or to talk to us as the final panelist on this round table. Patricia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Edward. And it's a great privilege and a great pleasure to participate in this panel with so many of my dear friends and so many people who have been on this journey for so long. But I suppose I have to make a confession that some people have said that they have not been dealing with this issue for very long. I qualified in 1977 as a barrister at the age of 21, and I have dealt with this issue my whole life. And frankly, I've had enough, because Yael talked about this, that some people have called the violence against women and girls a pandemic. And I have to tell you, I am one of those people.
Yes, you are.
Because sexual and intimate partner violence affects 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men globally. Children who witness violence in the home are 3 to 9 times more likely to be abused themselves. Now, if that is not a pandemic, what is it? It is the greatest cause of morbidity in women and girls. It's killing more women, more girls than any other single factor. And it's been doing that silently, year after year after year. Yet COVID has come. And we are all rightly terrified and enraged by what has happened. And yet I sometimes think, where was our rage about this pandemic, which has been devastating our world? Because let's be very, very clear. Unless we end this violence, unless we have peace in our homes, we will never have peace in our world, because this violence affects every single element of our lives. It destroys our children. It affects and undermines their ability to be healthy, to develop and have educational attainments, which they should. And ultimately, it prevents us from delivering the Sustainable Development Goals. So for me, this is non-negotiable. And if the Sustainable Development Goals cannot be attained without putting an end to violence against women and girls, we have to make that our top priority. As the global community celebrates key milestones of international instruments for gender equality in 2020, the world is facing this other human challenge of coronavirus. And just as we have come together to fight that, we must fight for the freedom from violence for our women and from our girls, because it absolutely devastates the lives of our men and our boys too. So the pandemic has threatened to roll back the hard-fought global efforts to achieve gender equality and prosperity for all our people. And the measures taken to address COVID-19, particularly the lockdown and the curfew measures, has led, as we have so tragically seen in the presentations we've had today and in the last 2 days, to a rise in domestic and sexual violence, which saw surging numbers of emergency calls to helplines and shelters. So some countries, it went up 25%, some went up by 300%, and some even more. And the important thing for us to absolutely absorb is this violence is no respecter of people. It doesn't care if you're black, you're white, you're rich, you're poor. You are a person of faith or you're a person of none. It doesn't matter if you're old or you're young, you have ability or disability. It is no respecter of people or place. So if we think about that level of violence that's happening right now, the acceleration, this equates to an act of sexual violence every 30 seconds globally. So just think about how long we have been on this webinar and the amount of pain and suffering and devastation that is happening somewhere in our world while we talk about it. So mitigating the devastating impacts of the pandemic requires joint collaboration to end domestic violence and sexual assault in our homes, our communities, our countries, and globally. So working together can bring about change that will save lives and protect families and ultimately flatten the curve on domestic and sexual violence everywhere. The Commonwealth heads of government and ministers have resolved that every effort would be made to prioritise prevention, mitigation, and response to all such instances of violence and abuse, including through the innovative approaches and campaigns such as our Commonwealth Says No More campaign. And all of you know that the Commonwealth represents 54 countries, 2.5 billion people, but 60% are under the age of 30. So the Commonwealth Says No More.org digital portal is the first pan-Commonwealth platform to address domestic and sexual violence and responds to the Commonwealth's commitments guaranteed in our mandates, our charter, and the priorities for gender equality. And the Commonwealth Says No More portal provides easy-to-use tools and resources to strengthen efforts by governments, by the private sector, and civil society organizations in support of victims, survivors, and those at risk and bystanders. So I can say absolutely, Zeid, go and look at the portal. If you're someone who wants to do something, there are tools which will help you to do it, because it is going to take absolutely all of us, government, local government, business, third sector, philanthropists, individuals, all of us, if we're going to be the difference that we need to see in the world. So I'm encouraging everyone, absolutely everyone, without exception, to engage with the portal, to take up the pledge and share 1-minute videos on your social media platform to say no more to domestic and sexual violence in our homes and in our communities. And I further encourage active use of the portal to help victims and vulnerable people to obtain critical information, to protect themselves, to find local hotlines and shelters, to escape abusive homes and seek justice. Because what do we know? If the most terrible thing about domestic violence is it manifests itself in the same way in all of our countries. So if it does that, and if we can find a way of responding, then we have a chance to help each other to respond to that violence more effectively, more swiftly, and more safely. So I conclude by calling our friends, our partners, our colleagues, to work closely with the Secretariat to effectively provide the much needed technical and financial resources to advance this campaign to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls in our generation. All I can say to you is we can do this. During the time I was the Minister, the Deputy Home Secretary in the UK, and then as Attorney General, we reduced domestic violence by 64%. And we saved $7.1 billion of economic cost per year. So I can say to Jeffrey, as an economist, we need you. Make the arguments, make the economic arguments, because there is a powerful one to be made. And if there is one thing I hope we get out of this, is not only a determination to make sure we do something about this, but that we each stop talking or just talking, and we really commit ourselves to doing, because this is deliverable. We just have to choose. I'm choosing because I'm tired. I'm tired of having conversations over women and children who are no longer with us, but should be. And so let's together, let's end this. Let's end this, because we can. Thank you.
Well, Patricia, that it is indeed a powerful argument, and I can think of no one who makes it more powerfully than you just have. That concludes our sort of tour de table, and we have, I think, about 20 minutes left. There are a number of questions. Incidentally, you'll be glad to see that Karen has already put the portal on the chat line so that people can contact it as you suggested. Yael, yes, sorry. Now you're mute.
I was just reflecting on the fact that we have not clearly stated the power and responsibility of the media, any media, whatever is available in any country, to help educate, to help carry on the message that Patricia voiced so powerfully. So I wanted to add that into the mix.
And I think I should tell you that all of our work on the No More campaign, which has been driven by our Commonwealth, has been greatly assisted by pro bono support from communicators. Everyone you'll see on the video gave their time, their effort for free. So you'll see we've got videos from prime ministers, presidents, stars, academics, all of the people you'll see on those videos, and have committed themselves because they want to make a difference. And so that I think it starts with us. It starts with each of us deciding, I'm going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, well, thank you very much. I mean, so many people then are at least saying the right thing. I'm tempted to go back to Zeid, who said at the beginning that one of the things international institutions don't do sufficiently is call out those member states and other authorities who are not doing what they should be. And that is, as I know from my own experience, is often the most difficult thing for an international institution to do, because you have to keep in with your member states and keep them on board. But I wonder whether you'd like to take up that challenge and say, you know, who you think is most conspicuously falling short at the moment and should be taken to task.
I mean, listening to Patricia speak so eloquently reminds me of so many conversations I had with presidents and prime ministers, and they would be all sort of flapping about saying, you know, almost helplessly, what can we do? And I would think to myself, you can do a great deal if you're basically committed. Why don't you accede to the relevant human rights treaties? Why don't you allow for petitions to those treaties? Why don't you properly domesticate the various provisions in your law? Why don't you reinforce your Human Rights Commission? Make sure it's independent, right? I mean, what are these people doing? So many just don't really care about their own people. And then they sign on to declarations, and it's not serious. It's not serious. The other thing that I find very troubling is that in international fora, as Patricia was saying, they all wax lyrical about how important it is to end this or end that, but they're not going to subordinate their trading agreements between themselves. They're not going to really impose sanctions. They're not going to sort of, try and create a campaign that has teeth. And what can happen is that the UN, if it only understands that it has leverage, soft power, but soft power is actually hard power, in the form of applying direct pressure and also, offering to contribute technical support, that it's not mutually exclusive, but to have some resolve and to say enough. I mean, I find it almost scandalous that, Yael says this is all voluntary, what she's put together, this summit. I mean, isn't that demonstrative enough of the fact that we have, pretty mediocre leaders, many of them around the world, and they should be properly called out by international institutions. The whole balance has been knocked out of kilter. This was not the case 20 to 30 years ago, where the UN, in particular, the Secretariat, was much more independent-minded than it is now, where I think it's basically a supplicant. And it's too cautious in the way that it approaches governments. And so I think governments with woeful records need to be singled out and need to be, and the rhetoric and the devices used need to be undermined, because when you look at their records, you look at their budgets and see how much they've invested into this. And then if they say they're serious and the budgets are barren of any proper investment, they're lying. So it requires a fortitude, and I think it requires strategy. And we need to look at, for instance, capital formation. We need to look at access to the capital markets. If you are a serial violator of the rights of your people, then it shouldn't just be your sovereign risk rating that should be looked at when you're an investor, but it should be on the ESG rating. This domestic violence phenomenon needs to be there. But we need to be strategic, we need to be hard. And I really find it difficult when I hear government officials say they're serious about it, and then look at their trading relationships, and are they really serious? And they're selling weapons to various countries that are the worst forms of human rights abuses. So there's much that needs to be done. And but I think the collective energy of this meeting was extraordinary. And I again pay tribute to Yael and to Karen for putting all of this together, and to you as well, Ed.
Well, that prompts me to go back to Patricia. Is there a mechanism for going back to all these prime ministers and people who've recorded these nice videos and things, which you invited us to look at, in 6 months or a year, and see what have they actually done? What have they put their money and their power where their mouth is?
Well, I think one of the really good things about what we've done is we've been totally practical, because we understand that so many people say, I would like to do this, but normally they come straight away and say, but we do not have the fiscal space to do it. So what we have done is, frankly, what I did when I was the minister responsible for this agenda in the UK. I didn't ask how much money will it cost me to address this. I asked a different question. How much money am I spending now by not addressing this? And we had some empirical data undertaken by Professor Sylvia Walby. Her analysis said that it was costing the United Kingdom £23 billion a year, domestic violence. And when you disaggregated that 23 billion, 3.1 billion was directly coming from Treasury, the money that was given to departments. 2.7 billion was loss of profitability for companies, for business, but the rest, 17 billion, was pain, injury, loss, and suffering. So what we did is we disaggregated the 3.1 billion. We understood exactly how much each member of the government was spending on it, department, and we together addressed it. So by the time we put together a holistic approach, we discovered that for every £1 we invested in this, we saved 6. So if you are economically smart and targeted, you do this because you can save money and you can save lives. So what you will find in going to the portal will be hard-edged, practical things that can be done by governments in order to make a difference. And I have to say to you that all the governments in the Commonwealth have said that they wish to do this, and we are implementing it. So we already have, UK says no more, South Africa says no more, and Australia says no more, but I would like every single member of our Commonwealth to have a no more implementation strategy. It's not enough to have the tools. We have to do this, and we have to make it easy for people to do it. And so all of the tools are open source, so you don't have to be a member of the Commonwealth to take advantage of the Commonwealth says no more. The whole globe needs to say no more. And that's why I say I'm confident we can do it. We can hold everyone's feet to the fire, because together we are finding the cheapest, fastest, best way of delivering this so it is affordable. And so if they come with, I can't afford it, we can say, do you want to save money? Businesses can save a lot of money by implementing the methods we've put in. You'll save money, you'll save lives, and you'll also do business, good business. It's good business to do good.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We now have about 10 minutes left. I'm just looking through the chat and to see, because there are questions that people have been sending in. Here's, I think, an important one from Olga Kulinchenko. What, from the point of view of our respectable speakers, can teachers and educators do? And she specifies she means school teachers and university staff. So would anybody like to take that question from among the panelists?
Well, I'm happy to do it because it's on our website and it's on the portal. So we literally, when we looked at doing this, we looked at every single one of us. So I can tell you one of the things I did when I was a minister. We looked at what firemen and locksmiths could do, because when someone breaks down your door, what happens is a locksmith comes to see you. So we trained locksmiths to be advisors and helpers. We trained taxi drivers. We had a black cab taxi driver campaign. We had a domestic violence month in the UK. If they breathe, we trained them. Doctors, nurses, teachers, lab assistants, you name it, we've got a training pack. And neighbors. If you can breathe, you can help. And we've got something for you to do.
That's great. Anybody else on the panel like to intervene at this point, either on that question or picking up what any of the other panelists have said?
Could I just very quickly? I mean, I find it. So I teach law in the law faculty, or sorry, human rights law at the law faculty at the University of Pennsylvania. I find it astonishing how most law faculties don't have a human rights center. Most universities don't teach human rights in any form. You don't find it, the two words human rights, in business literature. You don't find it in economic literature. There are wide swathes of the social sciences it doesn't exist. Most people's understanding of human rights is a universal declaration, 1 or 2 articles at most. It's quite astonishing. And you would be forgiven for thinking that it's entirely a weak sort of force of the human experience, when it's quite the opposite. So why aren't there faculties of human rights? Why don't you have human rights centers in medical schools, in computer science departments, in engineering? You know, it's quite astonishing. So going back to Yael's point, it's so siloed, it's partitioned and siloed, because inherent in it is the power of legitimacy. If you're violating the rights of your people, the people can vote you out where they can, if they have elections by dint of their constitutions, or they rely on others to point out that this is the case. I mean, I think Patricia makes such a persuasive argument, and I'm so pleased that she's on this. My problems, you know, because we tried similar approaches, maybe not as creative as she, is when you have serial miscreants, those who will say they, you know, going to do it, and they don't, and they're you know, almost shameless about the fact that there are parts of their populations that are discriminated against structurally, and then when you build that into, you know, the domestic violence phenomena, and also and also COVID, it's hardly surprising people are suffering in the extreme. But the simple fact of the matter is that many leaders are so mediocre, they don't care about their people. And I think to come up with all these creative things is brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. But I agree with you, Edward, if it doesn't seem to produce the result, what then? You know, and then we need real arm twisting, and that has to also take place at an international level.
May I add, we are all calling for action and take the rhetoric and the rights and putting them into people's lives. But I do want to also add a fear of mine that much of the progress that we have made in the last 35 years in terms of instituting rights, it seems so fragile. We have COVID come visit us, and boom, things go backwards. So I think it's not only to commit to change the situation, but to protect the progress, to not let it slip back. So many women, because of COVID, women, professional women, had to give up their income because they were the kids at home. I'm afraid that the glass ceiling would not be cracked in the right way. So let's both commit to do better, but also protect our achievements with great deal of care.
Absolutely.
But I do think there are things for us to do. I do think there are things for us to do, Edward, because what Zeid is saying is right, but I know there's an opportunity for us to create the pro bono clinics. Exactly. I know that when I was Chancellor at the University of Greenwich and others, that's the first thing I did. So it was also incredibly helpful, because what I found was those students who participated in the pro bono clinics exponentially did better than those who didn't, because it was applied law. And when people understand that this is not just dry, irrelevant information, but these are the tools that you need to give people liberty and to express their rights, it sets a fire in young lawyers that I hope will never be extinguished. I think if anything, and you may be the same, I'm probably worse than I was when I was 21. I'm more determined because I know I have less time and I'm not willing to wait anymore. I've lost my patience.
I wouldn't call that worse. I think I would call that better. Well, Victor, I wonder, I mean, in Uganda, yes. I mean, how does all this sound? I mean, are there such things as pro bono law clinics where you are?
Yes, we do have pro bono services, but still you need to make available resources to facilitate that. Like also when we had so many women arrested, my organization had to mobilize a group of 30 pro bono lawyers who helped secure these women from prisons. But also, most importantly, we had to appeal to the court to show leniency towards the vulnerable sectors of the society. Women and children, why should they be taken to prison? Because most of them couldn't afford even the court bail of $30, and they had to go to prison for 4 months. And that was really where we are coming up strongly. But also to add on my voice to the point where I think somehow globally and domestically we have achieved developing wonderful, brilliant initiatives, campaigns, policies, and development agenda. But problem has been operationalization. It has remained effective, brilliant in the global capitals. It has not trickled down to the people. We can come up with all the brilliant dreams and visions and grand initiatives, but as long as the ripple effects does not come to the local population, our word sorry, our word care just aggravates suffering and wounds. So we need to be able to reach out to the young people, reach out to the teachers. If we don't do this, our struggle to prevent this will just go as long as it takes, and we're not going to achieve anything. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed. We're getting very close to the end now. Anybody among the participants or the panelists would like to come in either with a final question or a final conclusion, comment?
Edward, can I say something? This is Miwa.
Yes, please, please, yes.
Yes, thank you, Edward. I just wanted to say that it's really thought-provoking what we're discussing here, and you know, as a UN official working exactly on these topics, the frustration of a lot of normative bodies coming into play, and yet like we can't get the action on the ground to change people's lives. That thing is definitely there. The issues about commitments of governments and how much we can push and hold account. But one thing I'm contemplating a lot, and I just wanted to share, is that I think one thing we need to do is to really focus on the empowerment side, not only to go with the rights aspects of it, and also some of the things I heard today about, you know, the economic argument, right? Like the cost of all this to the society is enormous. So I think without at all giving into the thought that human rights and these normative bases are important on its own rights and to be defended, in order to actually bring more action to change people's lives, I feel that we need to do much more to make this something that is supported and actions are taken beyond the people who are converted like us. So that's something where I'm thinking about what more can we do as UN, as communities working together. And just one other point I wanted to pick up, maybe for future conversations among many of us here, is about the prisons and the policy of using incarceration as a method of dealing with crime. You have said this, Edward, and also this intervention from Victor also highlighted the actual issues where we really need to be looking at a whole different policy around prisons and incarceration. So maybe that's something I would suggest that maybe we can look in future discussions to really address in reducing the problems. So thank you, and I conclude here myself. Thanks.
Well, thank you all, because I think it is now. Sorry, Yael.
Yeah, I wanted to just add, I would be remiss as a psychologist and a person in the health field if I don't also mention the notion of healing. And the healing here also really is about healing the homes, healing the society, healing the relationship among people, which Victor has to also be on the ground. It cannot just come from the top. So please remember that as a mission, and to put human rights, justice, and healing together, we created a whole body of work on reparative justice that doesn't only speak about giving reparations. That's what people think when I say reparative justice. And anyone who's interested, please let me know and I will send you materials. But it also looks at justice from a process point of view. So it's not only the outcome, but from the process point of view, to think of the whole process of justice as a relationship with victims, with perpetrators, and how every moment there's a choice of the justice system, whether to re-traumatize victims or to help them heal. So I wanted to throw it in because it's another way of putting together, rather than siloing notions of justice, human rights, healing, to put them together so we can live by it and we can implement it. And Patricia, you might want to enter that into your amazing website. I mean, I was blown away by it.
I'd be surprised if it isn't already there, because I know Patricia did a great deal when she was in office in the United Kingdom, specifically on this notion of reparative justice and bringing victims into the process. Well, I really want to thank you all. And I think that the lesson I take away from this is that rights are incredibly important, but it's almost insulting to tell people they have rights if they are not in the position to exercise those rights and they're not recognized. So I think that Miwa's point about the need to empower people so that these rights actually start to mean something is a crucial takeaway for me from this. And the other thing, of course, is which I think everybody has said, is that just saying the right thing, it doesn't really do any of us any good by itself. And there is a need for action, and it's therefore extremely appropriate that the next and final panel will be, in fact, a call to action. And with that, I greatly thank you all, and I pass the baton back to Yael. And I guess we have an anthem now, don't we?
Yes, we have our anthem. We have the anthem that was written and composed specifically for this summit by Peter Campbell from Australia.
Yeah. Before he got the key in the door, she could barely gather the will to keep going. He comes in and everything gets under his skin, and she cares which way the wind is blowing. The shame, bruises, everyone loses. Go grab some memories before waited for a change in the wind, for rain, for angels with miracles and song. She waited too long. Just after the lockdown, COVID crushed their resolve, and all their dreams disappeared with his wages. Alone with a daughter, every lesson taught her a little wisdom for the world that she faces. But they're so shattered and lost. Every line that got crossed fed their fear and their anger and left them alone. Waited for courage, waited for a reason to care when they knew they couldn't keep on. moves on. Hesitating, it's gone. How long is too long is too long. Just when our heart was done with its heaving and her nightmare rolled off her and settled, there was a flicker of hope through the pain in the dark, and she seized it, a fistful of nettle, crept to the cradle, a helpless tangle of sleep took her up, love so tender and strong. She waited for silence, waited for their moment to run. Was she right? Was she wrong? Too long, she waited too long. The moment calls, then it moves on. Hesitating, it's gone. How long is too long is too long. They wouldn't even know he was there at the top of the stairs. All his 4-year-old fears were forbidden. He learned not to weep, just rocked himself off to sleep. Learned what to show them, what to keep hidden. The eyes that see nothing, see everything breaking, see the trampled, see the trapped and torn. He waited for an end to the shaking, for an end to his aching, for the reason why he ever was born. Too long, we waited too long. The moment calls, then it moves on. Hesitating, it's gone. How long is too long is too long is too long is too long. How long